Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this week we are joined by another referral from Black Publications. So you heard the story and the show on Indian legends and lore a few weeks back, and you probably heard the show on moving through Kashmir a couple weeks back. And now we're going into a culture called Mizo, which is M-I-Z-O. I had never heard of it, I must confess, until now. So we're going to be learning together, and perhaps we'll do a little bit like we did with Kashmir and find out a little bit about the geography and the culture and the peoples, and maybe a little bit into the politics. But we're mostly going to be doing myths, legends, lore, and monsters. And our guest today is the author of a book. It was called Mizo Myths. I'm so smart. She showed it to me 2 minutes ago, and I already was like, I'm not sure what the name is. And it's Cherrie Chhangte, and she's coming to us again. Well, I think you're actually in the U.S., but for the purposes of my internationalism, I'm going to assume that you at least have some direct contact with Mizo.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
All right. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining us here in the Garden of Doom.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here. Thank you.
That's great. So, I guess, you can start off by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we can go straight into what is Mizo. All I know is at or near Northeast India. That's the extent of my knowledge.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, thank you again. Cut me off if I'm too long-winded or anything, but yeah. So, as we heard, my name is Cherrie Chhangte. My middle name, my actual tribal, ethnic middle name is Lalunziri. So it's quite a mouthful, I know. Cherrie Lalunziri Chhangte. And as we heard just now, I belong to a Mizo tribe, to a tribe of India called Mizo, which live in the state of Mizoram in the northeast corner of India, at the very tip. If you're familiar with the map of India, we are in the northeast at the very tip that borders Bangladesh and Myanmar and all of those places. And it's kind of funny, Jeff, because every time I tell people that I'm Indian, the first reaction is what? Because I guess we don't look very Indian, but that's because we were never really part of the Indian sort of borders from before. We were just, there are certain tribes in the northeast India that were independent. They had their own chiefs, they did not really fall under any jurisdiction, whether it was the Indian government or whatever. But so if you remember, the British came and colonized India, and administrative reforms were put in place, boundaries were put in place, and so to cut a long story short, when the boundaries, were sort of put in place, the entire region of the Northeast kind of came under Indian administrative rule. And so for the first time in history of the tribes of that region, not just the Mizo, but other Naga tribes, other tribes such as the Naga or the Khasi or the Manipuri, they came under this, for them, something that was really, really weird, because they were used to having these separate chiefs for every village. Even every village had its own chief, and they had their own sort of setup going on, administrative setup going on. And so for the longest time, that area has had a bad rep in the sense that a lot of these states, they did not want to come under the administration of India, and so there were wars. There were a lot of struggles going on for a really long time. But eventually, one by one, these states obviously had to sort of surrender, because these are small states. For instance, the entire population of the Mizo tribe is, I believe, about just a little over 2 million at this point. So, and so, I come from Mizoram, which, as I said, is inhabited by the tribe of the Mizo. The Mizo being a kind of sort of a umbrella term for the different, smaller sub-tribes that actually live there. But, personally, I have taught in India, in a central university in India, teaching literature to masters and research level scholars for almost 20 years at this point. And then we relocated to Chicago. And so right now I am in Chicago. I've been here for the past 4 years, came during the pandemic, and, it's been interesting. And we've got a very, very severe winter sort of thing going on at the moment. So I teach at a city college in Chicago. And in my spare time, I like to listen to stories and translate them and, write my own once in a while. So, that's about it.
So the winters are worse in Chicago than they are in the northeastern section of India, which is sort of like, I don't know how far, but sort of near where the Himalayas are, right?
They are, yes. Well, as far as India is concerned, the Northeast is a lot more cooler in temperature than the rest of the country, but nothing like Chicago. We don't have snow, we don't have the lowest that the temperature would go would be like, 0 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is like 32-ish. So Chicago's it's on its own level.
I know 0 Celsius is 32 Fahrenheit. That's about as far as I go with the low end of the scale. I know that 100 Celsius is 211 Fahrenheit, because the boiling point are 212. Anyway, so what's like the primary religion in Mizo? Is it Christian? Is it Muslim? Is it people call it Hindu. Hindu really isn't the religion, but we'll just stick with that to keep it simple. Something else?
So the Mizo traditionally were not, they followed their own religion, which was sort of a mixture of pantheism and, animism to some extent. And, they believed in spirits that they sacrificed to. They believed in, all sorts of beings that were from a different world, from a supernatural world, and that were sometimes benevolent and sometimes malicious, who had to be appeased, who had to be sacrificed to, and who had to be worshipped. But the concept of organized religion, so to speak, westernized religion, was not really in the history of the Mizo people until 1887, I want to say, when the first British missionaries came to Mizoram, and they started the work of not just evangelizing, but also educating the people, teaching them how to read and write. And this is interesting, Jeff, because for this entire time before the British came, all of our literature was oral literature. In other words, it was all just spoken. Nothing was in the written form. which is where it gets a little tricky also when you start talking about history and folklore, because a lot of the information that we do have is word of mouth, passed on from generation to generation. But anyway, yeah, so the British, they set up schools, hospitals, they also evangelized. So eventually, and it's sad that the Mizo people were one of the most easy to sort of convert to Christianity for whatever reason. And the British, the missionaries that came, they were kind of smart about it in the sense that, they respected the culture of the people, and so, for instance, the tradition in the traditional sort of belief system of the Mizo, the name for God, one of the names for God was Batian. So when Christianity came, and when they were referring to the Christian God, the missionaries adopted that same name for God. That was in the native language. And so, the transition was smoother. So this being that they had always kind of thought was somewhere in the sky, and that they had worshipped and had revered for, years and years, for centuries probably, suddenly had sort of a setting and a history and a proper, a proper background, because they kind of said, okay, this God that you don't know, that you've been worshiping, this is, the Christian God.
It's the same
and
God.
So,
so they use the name.
It's the same God. Yes. And so, and so Christianity became very, very widely adopted throughout the state. And so to the point that right now, nobody practices the traditional religion anymore among the Mizo. We are either, there might be people who are atheists and non-religious, but, even if they are non-religious, they still don't go back to the old ways, the old practices. So, it's primarily a Christian state, so to speak. Yeah.
So it sounds a lot like the religion originally was sort of similar to the other not other, but to the steppes people, also the First Nations in the Americas, which is really no surprise since they came from Asia and Siberia and etc. Aboriginal, even African, sort of a chief-based, clan-based societies and governance, and sort of animistic, paganish sort of, but almost more spiritual. So, all right, is there? I mean, I assume you were then raised Christian, but do you know? Is there like a creation story that you know for the traditional religion?
Oh yes. This is, I suppose this would come under the umbrella of folklore or whatever, but yes, we do have a creation story. But just before I get into that, yes, I think you brought up a very important point when you said that, there are similarities with other nations and other tribes and clans, across the world. So I had an opportunity to do some postdoc research at Stanford with Native American tribes. And what I found very interesting was the relationship that people had with nature, with plants, with rivers and animals and lands and things of that nature, and the community itself, which was all sort of brought together by, certain belief systems. So this is something like, I just wanted to comment on that, but yeah, there are a lot of similarities. And so, so coming back to the creation story, it's believed that it all started with this war between the animals of the land and the animals of the sky. One fine day, they decided that, somebody has to have, supremacy. And so the animals of the land all banded together, the same animals of the sky, and there was a great war that broke out between them. In the midst of all of this, I believe it was the bat. Yes, it was the bat who kind of played. He was trying to save his hide, and so whenever he was with the animals of the land, he would kind of side with them, and then he would go back and side with the animals of the sky, and he was considered to be a traitor. But anyway, so eventually, there was this huge war, and until finally the animals of the land, won the battle, and so when they finally got the victory, they decided, what was going to be what. They kind of laid out. They also named all of the animals. Prior to this, I guess the animals did not have names, but depending on the kind of actions and the kind of contributions that they had given in the war, they were given their names. The hen had a name, the snake had a name, and that sort of thing. And the bat was cursed by all of the animals from both sides because he was such a, what is the word for that? A turncoat or no, not turncoat.
He was a double agent. He was playing both sides against
a double agent, basically, yes.
Yeah.
And so they were like, okay, you might be able to fly, but you'll never be able to rest on right side up. You're gonna always be hanging upside down from now on.
Well, he's the only the bat's the only flying mammal. There's mammals that can glide and stuff, but the bat's the only flying mammal. So he had properties of both, I guess. It's funny. It's when you said that, I'm thinking, well, in a war you want air supremacy, but they always say don't get into a land war in Asia, and well, this creation story confirms that. Do not get into a land war in Asia.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So there's another, as part of that, I mean, that story comes in, it's not one long narrative that's kind of smoothly flows into, one section after the other. It's like different narratives kind of around the same thing. Another episode, so to speak, is where, the entire earth was covered by water, except for a small patch of land. And the animals, especially the land animals, were kind of frustrated and, sort of worried because they did not have land on which to sort of, live. And so they hit upon an idea where, well, the earthworm actually came up with this idea where he said, I'm able to eat soil and, and poop it out, in other words, right? And so he volunteered, but they all laughed at him. They ridiculed him, and they were like, "You're such a small little thing, and how are you gonna help us?" But eventually, they devised a plan. To cut a long story short, they devised a plan where the earthworm would ride on the back of the turtle. Is it the turtle or the tortoise that?
Turtle.
That's the one with the turtle, right?
Yeah, tortoises are on land. They can't swim, usually.
Yeah, yeah. And so they would go over to that little small patch of land, and the earthworm would, consume as much earth or soil as he could, and they would come back. And so they did this back and forth, and he would go eat as much as he could and then poop it out on the other side of until there emerged this wide, flat piece of land that they all pounded on to make it flat and even, and eventually they kind of had land on which to live.
Okay, well that's great. Well, that's fun. There is the noble diver story, and often involves a turtle. The diver is usually a human or something, but an earthworm is a interesting and maybe unique spin to it. Maybe not so unique, but to the region, but unique to my ears anyway. So that's cool. Is there like a well? You said that there was like sort of a chief god, like a sky father type. What was Bantian? Is that correct?
Batian. It is Batian, which is Batihan.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. It's almost like Pantheon.
Sorry, yeah. Just one thing.
Go ahead.
Another name for another. So I don't know if they were one and the same, but I don't think so. But there was another name that was attributed to a god, an all-powerful god, and that was Kwazingnu. And Kwazingnu was considered. The closest translation I can get to that for Kwazingnu is Mother Nature.
Okay.
And so it was a feminine sort of thing, whereas Batian was considered to be male.
Again, not unusual that the sky father and the earth mother. Okay, so some familiar themes there, even though the specifics are unique, or at least unique to my ear.
Right.
Is there like a devil, or is the bat like the closest thing?
The devil, as in like one sort of antithesis to God, you mean?
Well, it could be one, but if there's like 12 of them that are against Patian, or whatever it is, whatever your equivalent is of the devil or devils might be.
Right. Yeah. So there's no single entity, for example, that would correspond to the idea of Satan or whatever, right? But we have this whole host of spirits and goblins and monsters and beasts that were, like I said, kind of malevolent and, not looking for the best interests of human beings.
Gotcha.
So yes, we have a number of characters like that, but not one, not one huge overlooming sort of character like Satan or whatever.
Right, maybe more close to the Celtics or Norse, where there's more like trolls and ogres and fairies and fae folk and gnomes and whatever, and that kind of thing. All right, that makes sense. Would they be roughly akin to like what we would call demons, and are there something roughly akin to angels, or am I just reaching too far? It's just their own thing.
No, you're right. I think they're not exactly the same in the way that we would perhaps imagine them in the sort of the Western context. But yes, we have, for instance, I mean, do you want me to get into like the details of the?
Sure.
If you wish, I can. Yeah. So for instance, there's this character that often sort of makes her appearance in a lot of the stories. Her name is, it could be one demon, it could be more than one, but anyhow, the name is always Pungwinu, which is this female, almost like an ogre. She's very strong. She's disgusting. She has wild, long black hair. She's dirty and she's mean, and she is always very, very jealous of beautiful ladies, beautiful girls, and she's always looking to steal stuff or, mess up people's lives. And in some cases, she's been shown as, somebody who also eats people. So that's one. And she has long talon-like nails and, which are black. And, she's also, it's kind of funny because in a lot of the depictions of Pungwinu, she's not the smartest, demon in the pantheon, so to speak. And so in a lot of cases, in a lot of stories, she's really mean, but the protagonists are also kind of able to outsmart her.
Okay.
So that's kind of interesting. So she's there a lot, which if we have time, maybe we can talk a little bit in depth later on in one of the stories what she does. And then you have what I personally find interesting are the were-tigers, which are called Kami. Kami, when you translate it, literally is tiger person, which I think corresponds to were-tigers, I believe. And so, you had tiger persons, and it's kind of, it's a little hazy as to exactly where they lived or what they ate or whether they kind of, hung out with other tigers. But what we do know from the stories is that they very often mingled with human beings. And in most cases, they were able to sort of hide their tiger identity. And so, they were mistaken as being, normal human beings. And they even, in a lot of the stories, they fall in love with human beings, they get married, and that sort of thing, and but they're able to sort of shapeshift at will.
Do they have kids? Are the kids human, or are they were-tigers also?
The kids in the stories that I've seen, the kids look human, and I don't know if they have the same traits as their tiger mom or dad, but yeah, they look physically, they look human.
Now we know tigers eat their young. Do the were-tigers eat their young?
No, we don't have stories where they eat their young.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then another creature or sort of being that's very often seen in Mizo lore is the Lassi. Now the Lassi, Lasi, the Lassi are there are different sort of definitions of who they are, but I've seen some people translate them as fairies, but I'm not very happy with the translation of them into fairies, because fairies traditionally, when you think about, like, for instance, British stories and things of that sort, you kind of think of them as being small and flying around and cute, and the Lassie are not small; they are the same size as human beings. In some stories, Lassie, the women especially, are considered to be strikingly beautiful, so beautiful, in fact, that they kind of enchant men, and they have this weakness and this big attraction to hunters. People who are brave, and yeah. And so it's said that especially with the hunters of the tribe or the clan, because they tend to go and stay the night in the forest, looking for their prey and stuff like that. And so it's said that these hunters are often disturbed by Lassie in the middle of the night, because these Lassie try and sort of seduce them.
Mm-hmm.
And things of that sort. And it's been said that in a lot of instances they have kind of enchanted the men, and to the point where they cannot think of anything but the Lassie women, and they are determined to kind of marry them, and that's exactly what the Lassie wants. But then there are stories where you kind of also see the male versions of these Lassie, and generally speaking, they're supposed to be very attractive, and they have magical powers. But then there are other stories where the Lassie are described as having their eyes vertical. Like, their eyes are vertical, and then their feet are kind of backwards.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I'm trying to imagine what that would look like. So, again, on the one hand, you have these really attractive, beautiful, almost, ethereal beings, and then, you have these other descriptions.
Yeah, except for the wings, vertical, eyes like quarter slots and backward feet. I mean, if you could get past that, they're gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, but yeah.
Well, maybe their magical powers are to disguise their appearance until it's too late.
Yes, that's very possible. Yes.
I mean, I just made that up. I have no idea.
I think so too, because there's this Mizo phrase called, in these stories, there's this Mizo phrase called Lassizol, which literally translates to being possessed by a Lassie. So the idea over here is that they're not just being beautiful and seductive, but they're also actually kind of possessing the people that they are trying to sort of win over. And so these really brave hunters and warriors, they become helpless, and they eventually lose their strength, because all they can think about is them, and they kind of lose sight of everything else. They're all of their priorities, and they become weak and sickly, and then the Lassie kind of claims them.
Okay, well, when they claim them, does that mean that they marry them and they live, maybe unhappily ever after? Do they have children, or does the Lassie eat them?
No, so it's more. What I've seen is in two ways. So one is they do marry them, and they whisk them off to their own Lassie land, and they are forbidden to kind of continue relationships or connections with their human families. That's one way of possessing them. The other way that I've heard about is that they actually die.
Oh.
Their victims actually die,
sure.
And I guess the belief is that their spirits are now sort of possessed.
They suck their souls. Yeah, that seems like standard Monster 101. Are there anywhere we already talked about the were-tigers, they do this, but are there any other examples of some sort of, I don't know, divinity, something from the pantheon, whether from the good side or the bad side, having like demigods, interbreeding with the humans, and they continue to live among humanity? It sounds like whatever they do, they sort of go to their own land, or at least they do once they're caught. It sounds like the were-tigers maybe live amongst the humans until they get caught, and then they scurry on off.
Right. That's an interesting question. I never really thought about it, because most of the stories end sort of there at that point. We don't really see too much about their offspring, as far as I'm aware. And like we were discussing earlier, yes, they do get married. They do, kind of interbreed. I know that for sure. But I'm not. The stories have never really followed up on what happened to their offspring. So I'm not too sure about that. But what's interesting also is that it's not just the lassie or the Kami, the were-tigers. There's actually a story about this lovely maiden who falls in love with a python, a snake.
Mm-hmm.
And she's so enamored of him that she secretly goes to meet him every day in the jungle, and until she actually gets pregnant, and she gives birth to these hundreds of tiny little snakes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting because there's that boundary between humans and animals or other beings and other creatures. These are as with most other folk tales and folklore, the boundaries are not very clear cut, and they seem to have well, in the story, the humans are sort of disgusted when they hear that she is in love and has been mating with a snake. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like it's so weird. It's more like, this is not acceptable. We can't have a snake for your husband, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's more like Narnia than it is Earth. It's like, these creatures and talking animals are part of our lives. And, while that's not exactly, perfect behavior, it's not that unusual. It's funny when you say that she has these thousands of snakes. I thought immediately, because when you said a woman falls in love with a snake, it sounds a little bit like Eden, Eve, Satan, right? It wasn't really a love story, or was it? But I was thinking at the end of Rosemary's Baby, she gives birth to, Satan's son, and it's obviously some sort of creature, not a person. And, at first she rejects it, but then at the end, she's gonna, once she finds out there's gonna be other wet nurses, then she gets jealous. She's like, let me hold him. And then they know that then they know the bad guys won. So a mother's love for her children doesn't matter if they're scaly or skinny.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the concept of the snake as something that's inherently evil and bad. I thought this was sort of only primarily to do with Christianity and Christian sort of mythology or whatever, but it's not, because these are all pre-Christian era stories, and the snake was sort of hated by the people, and so I mean, it must have taken a lot of guts to actually be in love with the snake when it was so reviled by the villagers. But anyway,
this was the Brad Pitt of snakes.
Yeah, probably. Yes. Irresistible, huh?
Right. But it's funny you should say it, because the snake in a lot of cultures and most, and it's not just Indo-European, but Indo going east and European going west and outwards. So the snake and the serpent is often associated with water, and water is sort of chaos. So, and there's been studies that like something like 80% or more of people everywhere are afraid of snakes. And I don't know, like some people just surmise that that's like a survival instinct, because wherever you are, in the desert, there's snakes. In temperate zones, there's snakes. In the jungle, there's snakes. In the water, there can be snakes. Yeah, there's snakes everywhere. Top of mountains, there's snakes. And a lot of these snakes are poisonous and trying to kill you. And they're not afraid of you either. So it just might be that, wherever you were there, you were more likely to encounter a snake than, say, a bear or a jaguar or a tiger or whatever. But, but a snake could be anywhere. So, maybe it's just embedded in our RNA, DNA memory.
Right. Yeah. That's so interesting. I never really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. There's so many places that a tiger can be found in, but snakes. Yes, you're absolutely right. And in that story, the father of the maiden is so angry that first of all he kills the python, the main guy, the Brad Pitt, but also sort of kills his daughter essentially,
that's
because she's about to give birth, and slits her stomach open and stuff like that, and then he's lying in wait for all of these little babies, the newborn babies, to come crawling out, and as soon as each one comes out, he kind of he takes his sword and he kills them off, right? He does this, but there's so many of them, and he misses one of them.
Right.
And this little snake slithers off, through a crack in the wall, on the floor, and hides, and then eventually goes into a cave and grows up, right? And it grows up, and it continues to become a menace to the village, because it comes and steals their livestock and all of that, their plants, eats them, and the snake is so huge that it's impossible to kill. It's a giant snake at that point, and it hides in this cave. And I just brought this up because the intersection of fact and fiction. Because in Mizoram right now there is a cave that people still go to visit, and it's supposed to be the cave where that snake would hide out. And nobody was brave enough to enter that cave because it was so big and so powerful. And so eventually they kind of called this whole council of all of the people in the village, and then they devised a plan where half the people of the village went to one end of the cave, the other went to another end of the cave, and somehow they managed to fool the snake into coming out, and they chopped off its head. And so they finally got rid of that snake. But it terrorized, it started even eating their babies. It started out with hens and, cows and plants and stuff like that. And then it started eating their babies. So that was why it had to be killed. And then it's I'm sorry, let me just go on with this because it's kind of funny. There was this involved in that entire thing was this wise old woman of that village who was, very much part of the whole thing. But when they killed the snake and divided up its meat, okay, this is interesting. They ate snake meat, right? And so they divided up all of the meat among the villagers to sort of celebrate their victory. But because she was this old lady with no family, she did not have a whole lot of standing in the community, and so they just gave her the head of the snake, which had very little meat.
Right.
But she was not very happy, but she was like, okay, fine, this is my portion. So she goes home, cooks it, and it just will not get cooked. It just remains inedible. And so she does not know what to do, and she gets angry at the villagers, and she eventually, it's a bit of a complicated story, but she pretty much destroys the entire village with her anger using the magic that was in the snake's head. And then she finally throws the snake's head at the bottom of her garden, where it grows into a plant called gourd. I don't know if you're familiar with those bottle-like thingies, like a squash almost.
Yeah, like square pumpkins or whatever,
yeah. And it's a very sort of it goes off into that tangent. But the snake was something that was so reviled and feared and all of that, and yet you have this story where the most beautiful maiden of the village falls in love with the snake. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
I guess the moral of the story is to share the meat evenly, even with the old lady down the road, right?
Yep.
Now, this is a pragmatic question, and the answer very well might be no, because I'm talking about a huge part of the world, and I don't really, if somebody asked me where someplace was, I could generally take it, and like India, I could point to on a map. But if you told me to point to Burma, I'm not, I'd probably be in the right vicinity, but I'm not sure if I will get Burma or Myanmar or it doesn't matter, country ends. And the reason I picked Burma is because, Burmese pythons are sort of famous, but of course a Burmese python probably isn't in Burma, but probably isn't limited to Burma because the Burmese python doesn't have a passport and doesn't recognize borders. It's a snake. So are there like giant pythons like Burmese pythons in Mizoram?
Yes and no, in the sense that in the present times in general, there's very much more less sightings of pythons, but yes. And
well, that's because people probably killed them all, right?
I'm sorry?
It's probably because people killed them.
Yes, absolutely. And also, things like deforestation, which is, a huge thing. But if you look at the stories, yes, you have pythons, there's another story where these two orphan boys are kind of neglected by the village because they don't have they're orphans and they're very poor, and so they would they would be hungry all the time, and so they go to the river one day, and they long story short, they kill a python, and inside that python they find riches, like this python has swallowed like necklaces of gold and things of that sort, and so they become very rich. So again, my point being that you do have these pythons. It's actually a pretty common sort of snake that's mentioned in a lot of the folk tales. So like you said, I'm assuming that this would have come from the memory of the folk, from when they, because there's this belief that Mizo people have migrated from the Burmese side of that range. There's, like I said, because there are no written records, this is all sort of word
oral
of mouth.
History. Wait, can we take a pause right there? And actually, when you said that the Burmese side of the range, because what does Mizoram border on? I mean, obviously it's in northeast India, but what are the countries that border? You said Bangladesh. I know somewhere there, like Bhutan is sort of, is Burma that close?
Yes, Burma is very, very close. So I'm looking at my map right now. So it's basically Bangladesh and Burma,
okay,
or Myanmar now, as it's known now, Myanmar. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and so I mean, before that, all of us might have originated from China, and then migrated towards Burma, and then from Burma to what is now called Mizoram. So, I mean, that's the general consensus. Like I said, there's no hard and solid proof, but, when historians trace a lot of, the language patterns, the cultural sort of practices, there's so much we have in common with that, that part of the world. So it's generally believed that we might be very, very closely related or even descendants of the Burmese. And there's of the origin stories that you were asking me. One part of it is, when so something happened, some vague, scary thing happened in the past, and so all of the people of the world, okay, this is from the Mizo imagination, all of the people of the world sort of tried to run away, and they migrated towards the distant hills. And in order to escape that impending disaster, that scary thing that was out there, they all hid under this giant rock, right? That had a lid, right? So they hid in the rock, and they closed the lid or the lid or the door, whatever it was. And this rock was called Chinlung. And so anyway, so after a certain amount of time had passed, it was deemed safe to venture out into the world again, and so all of the people of the world were arranged into their own clans and their own tribes, and so they were let out of the world again, let out of the rock into the world again, one by one, clan by clan, and so almost everybody had exited at this point, but there were quite a few people left as well. But at this point, the Ralte clan, which is one of the Mizo clans, the Ralte clan started, sort of coming out of the rock, and they were so loud and so noisy that the people of the world, the people who had emerged from the rock, they said, the world is too noisy now. These people, if you let out more of these people, it's going to be too loud and too noisy. Just close the door or the lid or whatever. And so they decided to close the lid. And so the rest of the people were kind of stuck there forever. And so the Ralte were the last tribe or the clan to emerge from the rock. So that's one of the lores.
So there's still people, though. So there's an underground. There's a hollow earth. There's an underworld.
There's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not like a Hades or hell kind of underworld. It's just an underworld with I don't know, people stuck down there, mole people or whatever they've turned into.
probably very safe from nuclear attacks and stuff like that, because it seems to be a really safe place.
No,
like a bunker.
No one's gone since. Now, so this giant rock lid or the patch of land in our creation story, are either one of those things called the navel of the world? Because that term comes up so often.
No,
Nope.
I, as far as I'm aware, I don't think so.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. There's a lot of stories in I think all over North America, probably in South America too, but certainly Southwest, where people came from inside the earth. Like at some point when it was told it was safe, They came from the inside of the earth. And of course the people in the Americas, again, migrated from Asia. I mean, or at least that's what we believe to be the case. And we know that at least, the first 2 or 3 waves did anyway. Things keep getting older and keep getting a little bit more, muddled, but but these things we know, and so I'm sure that people who were in Burma and India were also meeting and encountering people from, as you point out, China and Siberia and whatever, and Japan, whatnot. And some of them probably crossed that Beringia land bridge, or did I think people they're now saying that maybe they sailed sort of using the Beringian coast, the ice coast, as sort of a guiding point. Anyway, it's really not a surprise that a lot of the stories sort of are the same, though I would personally love it if there actually were tribes of people underneath, because my favorite book is called The Descent, and the whole premise is that that's what happened, is that there's like entire tribes of humanity under there, and they are everything that goes bump in the night. Anyway, enough about me and my favorite book, though it is my favorite book, The Descent by Jeff Long.
That's such an interesting plot for a book, actually. Maybe you could write a book.
Yeah, it's my favorite book. I told you so. I like to think that it's interesting. So Jeff Long, you're probably not listening. You don't respond to any of my messages, but if you hear this, I still love you. Anyway, enough about me and The Descent. So is there like a version of heaven and hell that loosely translates to the Abrahamic religions?
I love that you asked me about that. You know why? Because it's kind of different, but kind of similar at the same time. But one of my favorite stories in Mizo folklore is about this couple that falls in love, is very madly, deeply in love, but due to certain circumstances, the husband dies a tragic death, right? And so this is where we see this Mizo conception of like life after death and the afterlife, in other words. So we have this in Mizo traditional belief. There is this journey that you undertake before you actually get to the land of the dead, right? When you die. And so when you go on this journey, it's a very lonely journey through fields and forests and rivers and that sort of thing. And in fact, again, this is very, very interesting because that journey, although there's no geographical map as such, is vaguely sort of, believed to be in the Zampai area, which is the border of India and Burma. Okay. Right? And so it's in that area, and you have to cross a certain lake, and that lake, which is actually a very real lake, is the one that, again, separates India from Burma. It's a huge lake. It's called Reveal. And so you have to cross that lake, and then you have to go over, fields and all sorts of scenery. And then you have to pluck a flower, which it's called the Hoilo Par, which would translate to the no turning back flower.
Okay.
Okay. And so you have to, and then you have to drink a bit of water that's come from the lake, and this is called lunglopi, which is where you forget, or rather you stop missing the living, right? So it's supposed to help you stop missing your loved ones. And so you drink the water, you pluck the flower, you cross all of these lands, and then finally you enter the land of the dead. And so what's interesting in one of these stories, one of my favorite stories that I was talking about, is that this girl miss each other so much that did I say the husband died? Actually, it was the wife that died. And so the husband actually goes on this journey while he's still alive to go and join his wife in the land of the dead. And so he goes there, they are reunited, they're so happy, but he's not dead, right? She's dead. But then, what happens is that, for instance, what they think, what the dead people, and there's this whole village set up, by the way, in the land of the dead. It's exactly mirroring what's happening in the land of the living, right? So they have their own setups, they have their village, their huts, they eat food, they do everything. But the problem is, what they think is a huge feast of fishes that they have caught, for instance, is to the guy who's still alive, it's just dead leaves, right? That's all he can see, So there, and it goes on and on. And so eventually, at the end of it all, he realizes that they can never be together again because they no longer see things the same, right? And so he, has to say goodbye, and he returns to the land of the living. So there's this conception of, like I said, it was a very long-winded answer, but yes, this conception of the afterlife, where you kind of go through certain things and then you kind of continue to live. I mean, I don't know if live is you continue to exist.
Right. And you're happy, but a natural person who's living couldn't live on what you're living on. They can't consume the dead leaves and, detritus or whatever is there. And that is, I guess the moral of the story is you got to let go and move on, right? So. Yeah. And I think it was a very powerful tale to sort of bring home that lesson that you just spoke about to the people, because this is what we always talk about, right? Like folk wisdom, it comes in the form of parables and stories, but this is essentially the message. I would think that you gotta let go. Well, this was a more pleasant turn than what I thought it might be, because Shintoism, the Japanese creation story, basically the husband and wife, and the wife dies, and the husband's so with grief, he goes into the underworld to go retrieve her, and I don't know how much time elapses, but by the time he gets there, she's this hideous monster, and he's so disgusted he runs away, and she orders all the other hideous monsters that I guess she's now like queen of the damned. She sends them after him, and he runs out, and he does what the folks did to those poor people in the underground. He moves a giant rock, sort of like the Cyclops in the Odyssey, and puts it in front and blocks them all in, never to see his beloved again, but to close the portal between the above world and the underworld, but he's a god, so he's not just a human. So I think he gets another wife, and they have wonder twins, and and then name all the animals, and he gets over because he's a god. But still, I guess saying don't mess with the underworld, even you, Mr. Son of the original Skyfather, you can't fare well there. No, he. In fairness, he just ran away. Maybe he would have beaten them all up. I don't know. But it wasn't tested. But it's funny because there's lots of, almost every religion has some story of someone or someone's traveling into that. And it's as often the female travels to the underworld as the male does, and sometimes both. But, these are, I guess, what they call archetypes. Or it just might be story drift, or just maybe things that are, I think archetypes are things that are basically drilled into our heads, just through, sort of convergence. So no real hell or heaven. There's just one place, and it's fine for them. But, you said that there's a whole lot of things you have to go through to get there. Is some of that a test as to whether you deserve to be there? Is there a difference between whether you've been good or bad, or is everyone ends there?
Everyone ends there, I think, because I don't, like you said, there's no real conception of hell, where you are punished for how you have lived your life or the deeds that you have committed. So I think everyone gets there pretty much. But yes, these are primarily, a lot of them are, again, to help you forget the land of the living, but also test. And there's this funny, I find it funny, and also very, very telling of the sort of the patriarchal setup of, traditional society, because in Mizo society, at least it was, when you're a maiden, as with so many other societies, being a virgin was considered to be your biggest sort of flex, right? If you're a girl. But on the other hand, with the men, it was, a feat of masculinity and so on and so forth to be able to sleep with as many girls as you could. So the numbers were not adding up, you know what I mean? Because every maiden was like, I'm a virgin, I'm pure, and every man was like, I've slept with 20 women or whatever, right? So anyway, when you die, there's this figure, there's this character called Bu, meaning Bu is just the generic term for like Mr. Bu Bola. His name is Bola, and he has a slingshot in his hand, and he guards the entrance of the land of the dead. And so when he goes, when a person dies, especially a man, he will ask, "Are you a virgin or not?" And if the man is like, "No, I'm not a virgin. I've slept with 20 women, 5 women, whatever," then he lets them inside. When they say no, that's when he shoots at them with his catapult and really big stones, and he tortures them first before he's able to let them enter the land of the dead.
So if you're a guy and you want to go into the land of the underworld, you have to have game. Yes. But somehow you need to live in a world where there's like 20 women to every man for the math to work out. Or so it doesn't matter whether you lied or not, or if she lied or not. Though I'm told there are ways to tell these things, but I'm not going to get into that in this show. I think we'll just skip over that entirely. All right, so we have our underworld, we have sort of our angels and demons, or sort of, so what are some of the other, it sounds like the first monster you told us about was almost witch-like, sort of like a witch and ogre combined kind of thing. I think the Meli, What are some of the other sort of major, I don't know if I want to call them monsters or creatures or mythological, whether they're beautiful, friendly, malevolent, or what. I think most of the ones we've been talking about are malevolent. Are there any benevolent ones?
Surprisingly, they're almost always, if not straightforward malevolent, they need to be mastered and sort of taken, sort of control of in order for them to do good things for you. Okay. So we do not necessarily, I think, as far as I'm aware, I don't think there are spirits that are just good and out there to help you. It's more like, okay, I've sort of established my mastery over you, and so now you do my bidding, that sort of thing. So and then you have, so like to answer your question, for example, what another sort of being that is not necessarily malevolent that you kind of see once in a while is Bandunula, which is translated to Sky Maiden. Okay. Right? She's a maiden of the sky. She is beautiful. She has long hair, and actually, it's not just one person. There are several of them, and they are basically women, ladies, maidens of the sky. And in some of the stories, it's interesting. People fly up to the skies, and there's an entire village set up there in the skies, right? They have their own little world up there in the skies, and these maidens are beautiful. They have wings, obviously, and they have these magnificent wings, and they have long flowing hair, and occasionally they would come down to earth to kind of have adventures or frolic with them, with the men over there. And so there's a story where there's this man who who always sees kind of traces of something having been disturbed in the pond inside his his field, his broom field, that is his paddy field. And so finally, he kind of chances upon these beautiful ladies that are, they're so iridescent, they're kind of shining in the morning sun, and they're bathing. And it turns out that these ladies have been flying down from the sky every morning at dawn to take a bath in the lake or pond or whatever. Yeah, and so he kind of spies on them for a couple of mornings, and then he kind of falls in love with one of them. And in true folklore tradition, he, instead of just going and introducing himself and trying to kind of win her over, he captures her.
Of course.
He tries to capture all of them, but he can't, obviously. You know, they're able to fly away except for one of them. And so he captures her and, you know, but the first thing he does is he removes her wings and puts them safe so that she cannot, you know, fly back into the sky. And so this lady has no choice. So she stays on Earth and marries him. They have kids. And, you know, it's kind of a longer story, so I won't go into all the details, but eventually she does manage to escape back into the sky because one of her kids, you know, unwittingly reveals where her dad has hidden the wings. And so she gets her wings out of the hiding place and flies back into the sky. And,
so
this guy, he's so dramatic, you know, he's so grief-stricken at losing his wife that he... takes a hammer, or you know, one of those things, and he smashes his testicles.
Okay.
That's his chosen way of committing suicide. But yeah, he smashes his testicles and he dies. And so eventually, being fatherless, the mother, of course, can see things from the sky, so she comes back for her kids and she takes them to live with her in the sky, and you know, and it goes on and on, right? So, but yeah, so this Banglesdesh is a very fascinating creature to a lot of folklorists who have been more familiar with Mizo folklore because, like I said, she's not necessarily malevolent. It's more like, you know, she's just very beautiful and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so.
Yeah, it sounds like she's just a different kind of creature, but I mean, the only happy part of this story is that the wings reattach. I mean, the rest of it. So now she's not the winged lady with backwards feet and the vertical eyes. This is a different winged, beautiful woman that lives up in the sky. And it's only women, or are there, like, you know, men up there too with wings?
Yes. Well, you know, there's no term for it now that you mention it, but when you go to their village, they do have, you know, husbands or brothers and things like that, sons. So I'm assuming that the men have wings as well. Okay. But in all of the stories that mention these creatures, it's just the females. It's just the, you know.
Well, that could make that math we were talking about even out a little bit. If you've just got all these winged females coming on down, maybe the men were in line. They just maybe not all of them, you know, tried to capture them like Borat with Pamela Lee, but you know, or Pamela Anderson.
You're right. You know, that's true. You know, in order for the math to math, the boys would have had to sleep with not just human girls, but also the Lassie and the Vantunula and whoever else.
I mean, even if they're going into other villages, those villages likely have an even distribution of men to women as well. You know, so I don't, you know. It's probably the less time spent on thinking about it, the better.
Yes.
Are there any other major creatures that we haven't covered that we should?
Well, there's this thing called a kwabang, which is not a major thing, but kind of more of a minor thing, but also very, very, very common. In fact, so common that the actual word is still used. Okay, let me explain this. The kwabang is a smaller kind of demon, right? And maybe I'm thinking similar to a goblin.
Okay.
Not too sure. But yeah, so a smaller kind of a demon. And what you can do is, you know, it's very mischievous. It tries to kind of mess with you. It's not that scary. And so what you try to do is if you capture it, right? Because it's small, right? So you can capture it in your hands or whatever. And in order for you to set them free, they can actually grant you a wish. But here's the thing, you know, that creature will grant you any wish that you can utter without breathing, without taking a breath. Okay, so you have to be really, really fast, no? And so whatever you can sort of, you spill out in that, those few seconds or that minute or whatever that you can hold your breath, it's going to come true. It's going to grant it for you. But if you breathe, that's it. So that's, and then, sorry, did I say Kuavang? That's the Peitam. And then there's another one called Kuavang, which is, again, one of those smaller spirits. And so what that does, there's no real mention of anything else it does except when you are the first person to break a silence, after a prolonged silence, for instance, you're in a group of people and everybody's very, very quiet, and then you're the first person to break the silence, right? when you do that, the Kwabang will come and mark you with a mole, right? And so the word for a mole or a beauty mark in Mizo is till today is called Kwabang Sinsa, which is marked by a Kwabang.
Oh.
Okay, so yeah, it's the term that's been used.
Well, we've all been the first one to speak of at some point, and most of us have at least one mole or beauty mark someplace. So we've all been marked by Kwavams, if I said that correctly. When you showed me the book, the cover, it was obviously illustrated. So my question for you is the book kid appropriate, or is it more for adults?
It's appropriate in that it doesn't really have explicit content. It could potentially be inappropriate in that, you have people dying left, right, and center. You have, creatures being eaten and, all of that, right? So it can get a little disturbing, as with most folk tales, because, but by and large, I wrote this, with kids in mind also, because, you have this whole diaspora of Mizo people living in not just within India, but also outside of India, who have not really grown up with these stories, and they've kind of forgotten about it. And when they try and read it in the native language, for some of them, it's actually a problem now, because they're so much more used to English. And so I did write that with kids in mind. But having said that, like I said, there are some instances where there's some violence there.
Well, that's not unusual. I mean, Grimm's fairy tales are terrifying.
Exactly.
Greek mythology, terrifying and very rapey.
Right.
Yes. So you mentioned that about 2 million people, and where? I mean, other than Northeast India, and I guess thereabouts. Where are most of the Mizo people living now? I mean, is there a significant population in the United States? Are they in China? Are they, with Russia? I don't know. I'm just making things up now.
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I apologize in advance if this is too much of a long-winded answer, but it should be a pretty straightforward answer. So the straightforward answer is, Mizos have, because of work mainly, migrated to different parts of the world. So you do have a substantial Mizo population, even in the United States, especially right now. Now this is where I'm gonna explain a little bit. With Mizos from Mizoram. A lot of them tend to reside in the Maryland area. That Washington D.C., Maryland.
Sure, I'm in Maryland.
Area, right? So, yeah. Oh, okay. But why I said Mizos from Mizoram is because in the 1960s, when at the height of the struggle for independence from India, a lot of the Mizo people, because it was so there was so much unrest, they actually fled to Burma, and then they settled there. And so they're not Burmese, but they have actually been there for like 2 generations, right? So and so they've got their homes and they've settled there, but because of the political situation in Burma, that's been ongoing for decades at this point, a lot of them have been granted asylum in the USA.
Okay. So Burma is now
the Burma side. You have a lot of Mizo, tribes under the Mizo umbrella settling as refugees in the U.S.
Okay. Is Burma now Myanmar?
Myanmar, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I always get confused between Burma and Cambodia. Which one is Myanmar?
It's Burma is Myanmar, yeah. So for them, they tend to kind of sort of congregate in areas where the government has given them, what is the word for it? Where they've relocated them. So a lot of them in Indiana, some again in the Maryland area, but Indiana is a place where you would find a very big population.
Not to be too stupid, but it's sort of a missed opportunity by the United States not to place Mizo people in Missouri. I mean, it's already called Mizzou. I mean, you know.
Right?
I mean, if you're just picking places at random, I mean, there's no, you know, I mean, no offense to Indiana, but there's nothing so much special about Indiana, you know, over Missouri. Now, Maryland is the land of honey and milk and roses and all things wonderful. So Maryland, you know, those folks, they won the lotteries. You know.
Yeah. So it gets political, so I don't want to get too deeply into it. But you know, the sense of identity that, I mean, everybody identifies as Mizo, more or less, but at the same time, they have grown up speaking different dialects. Because under the Mizo umbrella, you do have smaller, you know, more minor dialects, which a lot of these migrants actually were speakers of those dialects. And so they're not very comfortable with, for some of them, they're not very comfortable with, you know, what we now call the Mizo language. But also the fact that they primarily were not even born in Mizoram, right? So their perspectives and their experiences have been vastly different. And so, which is why, you know, there's a lot of effort to reunite Mizo people from everywhere, okay? But then at the same time, the reality is that there is a little bit of a gap between Mizoram, you know, what we would call like Indian Mizos or Mizoram Mizos, or, you know, that sort of thing. So that's why, you know, I'm not trying to ruffle any feathers here. I'm just trying to explain why I said, you know, of the Mizoram Mizos, there is a substantially smaller amount of people, and we're here mainly because of work. Like, you know, my for example, my husband is a software, you know, engineer and got transferred here, so we came in via that route. So less of us from India. And I guess a substantial, you know, actually there are quite a lot of them actually from the Burma side.
Are people from, I mean, I don't know which side is better if you're a Mizo, where to live, but are people from Burma, is there sort of free, or Myanmar, sorry, is there free travel to India, or is it restrictive? Like if they want to move back, could they?
No, well, supposedly there's supposed to be a, you know, the whole visa, passport, whatever restrictions, but for the longest time, you know, it's just been, you just take a bus and you cross the border, right? Or you take a sort of a boat that leads you from, so it's never been that strict because it's not a priority, it was never really a priority of the Indian government. We are the small little state that borders, you know, at the very edge of the Indian map, and, you know, it doesn't really sort of affect national security, so to speak.
Right. So
it's been very casually done, except now because, again, Myanmar is going through a lot right now.
Right.
And so Mizoram really never had a problem with people coming in because they were its own people, so to speak, right? But now you have people who are not even Mizo, who are actual Myanmarese, you know, we're actual Burmese who are actually trying to kind of settle here, settle there, and so that's illegal because they're not sort of Mizo, right? And so it gets a little tricky.
So
I believe it's getting a little more strict.
So if you are Burmese, you may want to be like one of those creatures of lore and try to marry a Mizo to get into India if you're not so thrilled with your lot in life in modern-day Myanmar. Because for those who don't know, Myanmar has been over, you know, it's been a series of military dictatorships and coups and you know, getting over. Yeah. So, all right, well, yeah, I mean, this is obviously not something I don't know a whole lot about, but it sounds like if you are Mizo, you can make your way back if you want to. Doesn't seem to be a policy of the Burmese government to keep you in, or the Indian government to keep you out. But if you are not Mizo and you're sort of just a hitchhiker, then it gets more complicated.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm sure that's way an oversimplification, but this is Garden of Doom, not Garden of international politics and immigration. So, you know,
you can feel free to cut out that entire portion.
I'm not cutting out anything. This show is the whole thing is an entire fraud. This whole show is for me to learn about things I don't know about, and I pretend it's a show and hope that other people don't. And I assume that if they know about it, either they like hearing it, or they're going to say, "Hey, your guest had that wrong, so can I talk about this?" Or I'm going to presume that chances are they've never heard about it at all, and that also it's all part of the roots and branches and stems and swamps and rivulets of the Garden of Doom. So with that, tell people where you can be found and followed if you want to be found and followed, and how they can buy your book and anything else that you would like them to support you in.
All right, yeah. So my book is available on Amazon, and we're doing that thing where it's what is it? The desktop? No, the whatever. Anyway, it's easily available on Amazon. I'm on Instagram as Donuts and Subways. The Donuts is spelled with the British spelling, DOUGH, Donuts, and Subways. So that's my handle on Instagram. I am not very active elsewhere, and I have a blog called Ms. M-I-Z for, shortened Mizo, shortened form of Mizo, MsDaydreamBeliever.blogspot, where I kind of write whatever comes to mind. So you might potentially like to look at that.
Well, you just gave me the outro song, Daydream Believer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know. And that's a song my folks used to play when I was small. So yeah, it kind of stuck. The phrase kind of stuck with me. So yeah, and then I have short stories, poems scattered here and there in other people's publications, mainly as anthologies and stuff like that. I haven't really taken the jump into independent publishing, but yeah, my writings are kind of, if you kind of Google me, you might find stuff that I've written here and there. All right, so it's Cherrie, Cherrie. Last name is spelled Chhangte. That's not a mistake. There's two H's there. And the primary book we've been talking about is Mizo Myths. And if you go to Ms. Daydream Believer, you can find the catalog of her other works, and they'll lead you to her blogs. I'm sure you can find it through Amazon and her Instagram, and probably through Bluff Publications as well. So we thank them again for referring you. We thank you for agreeing to come on the show and teaching us about stuff that we totally don't know about and didn't even know existed, and it was all very interesting and a fun conversation. So if you ever want to come back and chat some more on other things, that would be terrific. And listen, stay warm in Chicago. It's called the Windy City for a reason. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I had a wonderful time. I might have missed out on some facts, and I apologize in advance for that if I did. But I learned so much from you. I'm going to take with me that little thing you said about snakes, and your reasoning for why we're all scared of snakes and stuff like that. And it's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And folks, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure that you did. And if you did, please give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. You can do that on Apple and Spotify. Of course, that's not the only places you can find us. You can find us on Spreaker, Podbean, Soundgarden, or SoundCloud, Google, wherever. You can find us everywhere. And as part of the Wrestling Soup Network, thank you to those fine gentlemen over there. And more than anything else, just like her books, we would benefit from personal referrals as well. So share what you like with your friends, because that's more important than anything else out there. Otherwise, we will see you again, or really, you'll hear from us again next week again in the Garden of Doom.
What number is this, Chip?
7A.
Okay, no, don't get excited, man. It's because I'm short, I know.
Oh, I could hide neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings. The 6 o'clock alarm would never ring, but it rings and I rise, wipe the sleep out of my eyes. My shaven razor's cold and it stings. Cheer up, sleepy Jean. Oh, what can it mean to a daydream believer and a homecoming queen? You once thought of me as a white knight on his steed. Now you know how happy I can be. Oh, and our good time starts and ends without $1 to spend. fish bait.